Welcome back to the Mind and Money podcast. I'm Val, a financial planner.
And I'm Sherry, a financial coach. And today we're talking about how to get out of the paycheck to paycheck cycle, which we know is the reality for so many, especially, we're still post holiday ish, and like life has become more costly recently, and cost of living in general has gone up. So even people who previously weren't in that paycheck to paycheck cycle can feel themselves kind of stuck there now. And it's a pretty common thing that I see with my clients when we start working together. And it's challenging to get out of, but it is possible. And kind of overarching, there's kind of two different scenarios of people in a paycheck to paycheck cycle. And the first one is people that are lower income. They've cut as much as they can, and they're still feeling those challenges. And then the other end of the spectrum is more people that they're making a good income. They're not paying attention to their money. They don't know where it's going. And there is a lot of opportunity to be able to make some changes that aren't as extreme to get out of that paycheck to paycheck cycle.
And I want to say we've both been there before, and we work with people that are there currently. So when we're speaking to the smaller income aspect of paycheck to paycheck, with both of these, we're not reinventing the wheel. We are not sharing 5 tips that will change your life forever. We're not giving you the magic pill. We're telling you the tried and proven things that work if you're willing to do the work.
And that really is what it comes down to. It's work, it's effort, it's high effort for some households and individuals, and it requires some changes, and you have to be open and willing to work through those changes and figure out what works for you. And a lot of it comes down to, especially on the end where it's the higher income and you're just not actively manage it, is having a plan and aligning that plan with systems that work in your life. Like, it's such a common thing to hear when I'm talking to a new client or a potential client is, they've created budgets dozens of times and they should have X amount left at the end of the month, but they never see that and feel that. And the budgets end up piled up in a drawer or in a folder on their computer. And it's really about, how do we implement that? So lower income end.
Yeah, let's kind of split it into 2 paths. So let's go, lower income sounds degrading to me. So I'm going to call it smaller income, but we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just where you put your numbers together on paper or in a spreadsheet, and there's not a whole lot left over at the end of the month. Mm-hmm. And in those situations, where do you recommend somebody starts?
So you've put your numbers together. Fantastic. There's 2 different ways we can come at this. One is, what can we cut? So expenses, right? There's money in and there's money out. On the out portion, is there anything that can stay that doesn't have to go out, whether it's subscriptions, automatically renewing things that we didn't know, which is often subscriptions. And then on the money in, can we raise our income, right? Often, not always, but it can be like overspending just regardless. That might just be cost of living, groceries. So, okay, we're not making enough to survive. Can we change anything that we're spending? Could rent be different? Could we relocate if we work from home and pay less in rent? Yes, it would be short-term inconvenient. And there's the first and last month's rent. Like, there's all those pieces to think of. But for a focused amount of time, can we really buckle down? Can we really focus on what's coming in, what's going out, and what gears can we change? So that's typically money that goes out and the money that comes in. Do we need to make more money, or can we change something drastically in the money that goes out? And sometimes it's a bit of both.
Yeah, sometimes there's not a whole lot of opportunity to increase income. So we have to kind of go balls to the wall around, like, how can we cut as much as we can?
Yes.
While we potentially look for a new job or to start a side hustle or to increase income. But when it's an income challenge, being able to be super, super intentional, like a lot of the things that we're going to talk about the higher income are going to be similar, but it's kind of like, it's a more extreme level that we're doing things to when it's an income challenge, because then you have to, then cutting a $20 subscription is a lot more impactful than if you're making, $200,000 a year. It's those smaller changes have more impact. So focusing on what can you change? And a big portion of any household budget right now, and it's typically been a big portion, is food spending.
Yes.
So focusing on, if there is any spending on takeout, can we cut that out. And I know it's challenging because lives are busy, but if you have a tight budget and you're looking to get out of the paycheck to paycheck cycle, can we do things that allow us to eat more at home? And can we also do things to reduce our grocery spending by where we spend, what we're buying, looking for coupons? There's a social media account on TikTok that's doing a really good job of looking at the flyers for the grocery stores and putting together meals that cost, I think, less than $10
Yeah, based on the
for a
flyers.
household. So how can you optimize all of that? And also, you mentioned moving. I know across Canada, especially, rents are crazy. They've gone up
Ridiculous.
an extreme amount. But yeah, if you work from home, can you move
Yep.
to a more rural area that maybe has, but then it's also too, if you move to an area
Right.
where the rent is lower, maybe you're using public transportation now. So it's all give and take.
Yeah. And I mean, give and take, a bit of sacrifice too, in terms of like, if you're in a 2 bedroom, can you get a roommate, right? Like
Yeah.
getting creative, I'll say. And depending on how many people are in the financial picture, if it's a couple or if it's just you individually, who's all on board?
Yep.
And how much control do you have over it? If it's your numbers, you have full control over it. So, and still having room in there. It sounds like we're getting kind of stringent, but still leaving room for joy, right? Because if we go too far to the extreme, we just yo-yo back to the other side.
But also sometimes you have to go
I
that
know.
far to the extreme. So thinking about, like, if there isn't room in your budget to do things that bring you joy, what things can bring you joy that are no cost? Like
Yes.
going for a walk in the park,
Yeah.
spending time with a friend, making
Right.
coffee at home and having that visit. There are ways to really be extreme with cutting back your spending,
Yep.
but also still find those little pockets of joy in your life, because it doesn't all cost money. We have it shoved down our throat that all the things that you're going to love are going to cost money, and that's not.
Yes.
Okay.
And starting that as a note in your phone of like joy for free, and writing down those things that, so when you have that itch of like, I want to go do something, look at that list and be like, oh, this will scratch that itch.
Yep. I love that. And we'll talk about it a little bit later because it's the same for both extremes, is that like looking at your cash flow and having a budget and a plan is great, but really to move that into practical application, it then becomes, you need to transfer that budget into cash flow tracking to know, okay, here's my fixed plan, but here's what it actually looks like for this month and next month and the month after. So,
well, let's segue with that, because when I sit with clients, a budget is great. It's just numbers on a piece of paper that we think should work, right? So when clients come, they're like, oh, I should have this much left over, regardless of income, or not have any left over. But when we look at why doesn't this happen? Why don't I feel that? Well, I typically say, just look at the last month and record what happened. And that's part of that cash flow tracking. You're going to see that these ideal perfect numbers, what's reality?
Yeah. And a lot of people, like, a budget is like a common term, but when you hear cash flow, people are like, well, isn't that for a business? Or
yeah, accounting.
But really, as the more aged person here, like, so if you remember ever having a checkbook and tracking.
Hey, I had one. Oh, no, I didn't. Sorry, never mind.
You have memories of one, but you didn't actually.
I was thinking of the bank book where you would get your,
Yeah. But so like the checkbook, it's basically like, nobody writes checks anymore. I can't remember the last time I wrote one, but it was there to make sure that you knew what checks you had written and adjusted your bank balance based on those checks that you had written. And even though it might say, if you went to get your bank book updated, it might say you have $500 in there. But if you had a check that somebody hadn't cashed for $100,
right,
then you actually needed to live with a $400 balance because you didn't want that check to bounce, because there's a lot of fees to that. So the 2025 version of that can be a notebook, but I love using a spreadsheet because the spreadsheet does all the math for you and also makes cut and paste month to month a lot easier versus writing it all out. If you like to write it all out, that's for you. And also, if you're an Apple user, the Notes app will now do math for you. You're welcome.
Nice.
So really being able to see, like, okay, it's such and such a day. What account balance do I have in my like main checking account? And what bills are coming out and what expenses will I have, like groceries or gas or public transportation, before I get paid next? And then what will my bank account balance be before I get paid next? And kind of like doing that over and over, focusing on your pay period sections so that you know how much do I have to spend this pay period. And if you can get to the point where you're spending $100 less each pay period than you're bringing in, then you can start to stash that $100 every pay into an emergency savings account, which will then help you start to get out of that paycheck to paycheck cycle where you have that little bit that's
The
adding up.
buffer. One of the pieces that might be helpful too is to separate your spending slash living and your bills.
Yes. Yeah. And we talked about that.
Yeah, we've definitely talked about that.
I will link it in the show notes, but an episode early on around ADHD and budgeting where we talked about different accounts to set up to make your life easier, because it sucks to track every time you went to the grocery store or the gas station, or like all of those transactions are things that can often lead us to stopping the things that we know will help us and like stopping our cash flow tracking because, well, there's too many transactions there. It's annoying. But if you move those into a separate account, then you're really only tracking
the balance,
your bills, and having it in a separate account adds so many other benefits, which, you know, we could talk about forever, but we're not going to. Go back and listen to the episode, How to Budget with ADHD.
So with the paycheck to paycheck piece, we've talked about the smaller income. We've talked about actually looking at cash flow, not just creating a perfect little budget in a perfect little world. Let's talk about the higher income. I make great money, but I don't know where it goes story.
And often what I see with my clients that fall into this category, a lot of it is debt repayment, because more money, more problems. You can access a lot more debt. A bank is a lot more willing to give you a credit card with a high limit if you have high income. So a lot of it often falls down to, in those higher income sides, debt payments.
Yeah.
So is there ways to optimize those? And I have conflicting feelings on things like rolling debt into a line of credit or a zero balance credit card offer. What can often happen then is then you just end up with more credit cards. But if you first look at really getting on top of your cash flow and managing that and starting to get a little bit ahead and not using your credit cards, then taking out a 0% offer for 12 months and moving a chunk of your high interest debt there can really help you move the needle a lot faster in like clearing some debts. And like when a debt falls off your budget because you've paid it off, that's $100, for example, every month back in your cash flow that you can do more with. And like paying 25-30% in interest, like it's a challenging spot to get out of. So really, again, intentionality, having a plan and implementing that plan into your life by adding cash flow tracking for at least 2-3 months in the future.
And I mean, working with an expert to do it, you don't have to do it alone. There's people like us who love helping people with their numbers. I think that's such a big part. If you're listening to this and feeling overwhelmed, you do not have to do this alone. And you don't have to get sold something to get help.
I've worked with people who have worked with different financial professionals, and they came away with a really sour taste in their mouth because they felt judged, they felt shame. And
a lot of financial planners or advisors specifically are trained and maybe focused more on selling a product or pushing something and not looking at that holistic picture.
Yeah.
So then there's shame of like, oh, you don't have enough assets to work with me. Or, oh, I went to go to this financial expert and I left with this whole life policy. No idea.
Yeah. Or an automatic withdrawal for $400 a month to go into my investments because they were helping you create a plan to help you find money to put towards investments, which then they profit.
But it didn't actually set the foundation for you. So
there's so much, it feels so heavy to reach out and ask for help with finances. And there's so much like negative emotions around that. But if you were to ask for somebody or you'd be able to be in the position where you could have somebody come and clean your home or detail your car or cut your lawn, like those
paint your nails.
Those are things that it's like they're celebrated.
Yeah.
And then getting help with your finances isn't something that people often celebrate. It's more of like, oh, I'm such a horrible person with money. I need help with my money. And also I've heard this before. Like, why would I pay you money to help me with my money when I need help because I have money problems? And if you're in the I've Googled it all. I've made all the budgets. Finding a way to add in accountability, but also quiet the noise of all of the things that Google says you should do with your money.
It's like going to a doctor versus WebMD or whatever it is. Like, cut the struggle, cut the stress.
That's a good analogy. And like, yeah, there's lots of resources, like obviously this podcast. Thanks for being here and listening. Be sure to subscribe. But I've got lots of blog posts and stuff like that. There's lots of information. If you are looking to do it on your own, I encourage you to look at resources specific to how your brain works. And if you have ADHD, the advice for neurotypicals doesn't work for us because it's not designed for our brain. So if you're Googling, be very specific about what you're looking for and find advice from experts online, because there's so much financial noise out there from experts who are putting fuel on the shame fire and the embarrassment fire. That's not going to help you. So know that there is help. The biggest way, if you're looking to do this on your own, is to start really tracking your cash flow and getting intentional with your spending as the second step to having a budget in place that does balance, and then figuring out how to implement that balanced budget into your life, and start to just put away little bits as you can. As soon as you see that there's a cash flow surplus, stash that away in a savings account and put it somewhere that's not in your checking account, because that's just a recipe for it to disappear.
Get to know your numbers.
Yeah. We've said it before. We'll say it again.
Put it on our headstones.
Have a budget, manage your cash flow. The cash flow part is the missing piece of the puzzle for so many people who have budgeted.
Tell your shame to piss off, because it's only going to keep you small.
Exactly. And you are capable of doing things. You are capable of change. And what I see quite a bit is when people start to make changes, it then is like a signal to the universe that like you're open to more money coming into your life because you're actively managing it. I started working with a couple at the end of last year. And then when we met, I think it was our last meeting in 2024, he said that somebody is closing their business that is aligned with his business. And that person has essentially like pointed all of their clients towards him. And it's like, it's interesting.
Think of financials as like houseplants. The universe sends us houseplants, but if we keep killing them, it cuts back on what it sends us until we learn how to start taking care of it.
Of course, there's a houseplant analogy. Yeah, it's like when you are being responsible and actively managing your money, being intentional with it, the universe does, like, it has your back. It sounds cheesy. Old me would think I was ridiculous and roll its eyes at me, but I've seen it multiple times where you have fewer financial emergencies. When you have money to cover those emergencies, you have more income, especially if you're self-employed, coming in when you're more actively managing it. It's just, it all just plays together and plays a part to help you get out of that paycheck to paycheck cycle, because it's a shitty place to be. And it just keeps us at a high stress level all the time. And we don't want you to be there. So cheers to ditching the paycheck to paycheck feeling in 2025.
Thanks for listening to the Mind and Money podcast.